I understand the Iranians are walking around very satisfied in Geneva, as well they should be, because they got everything and paid nothing, everything they wanted. They wanted relief of sanctions after years of a grueling sanctions regime. They got that. They're paying nothing because they're not reducing in any way their nuclear enrichment capability. So Iran got the deal of the century, and the international community got a bad deal. This is a very bad deal. And Israel utterly rejects it, and what I'm saying is shared by many, many in the regions, whether or not they express it publicly. Israel is not obliged by this agreement, and Israel will do everything it needs to do to defend itself and to defend the security of its people.
All right, folks, welcome back to the Steve Malzberg Show. Benjamin Netanyahu, Israeli Prime Minister, not happy. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry in Geneva saying that important gaps needed to be bridged in the talks with Iran about curbing their nuclear program. And he began talks with the foreign minister to try to reach an interim deal. This comes on the heels of the Obama administration pressuring the Congress not to enhance the sanctions, and reports from Eli Lake and Josh Rogan that, in fact, long before any deal was talked about, the U.S. was quietly lifting some of the financial pressure on Iran already. Joining us now to talk about all this is Richard Perle, former chairman of the Defense Policy Board and American Enterprise Institute fellow. Hello, sir. Glad you could join us again.
Happy to be with you.
Well, thank you very much. Okay, what do you make of what's going on in Geneva and the Prime Minister's reaction to it?
Well, of course, we don't have or at least I don't have the details yet about what has been agreed. But I expect that the Israeli Prime Minister is looking at one question, and that is, does this stop the Iranian program or not? And I'm afraid the answer is it doesn't. So he's looking at the right question. He's raising the right issue. Interim agreements in situations like this are always hazardous. The hope is always that it will last for a little while, bridging a permanent agreement that does meet one's needs, and the need here is to stop the Iranian program, but it rarely works out that way. So I think I would have to agree that this is a very doubtful deal from the point of view of all of us who are endangered by an Iranian nuclear weapon. And it's not just Israelis, it's the whole world, really.
Why do you think, or let me rephrase that, is it do you think it's naivete on the part of the administration to trust the Iranians, or do you think that there's some ulterior motive? And even if they can somehow get Iran to halt their nuclear program, that would be a great victory. But the president wanted to shake the president of Iran's hand at the UN, the hand that has the blood of many Americans on it, independent of this whole nuclear program.
Well, there are many issues between Iran and the civilized world, and Iran and the United States, of which their nuclear weapons ambitions are only one. There's the Iranian involvement in terrorism. They are the number one sponsor of terrorism around the world. Just look at Hezbollah, for example. So we have a lot of issues with Iran. There's been I think, overemphasis on the nuclear issue because people are concerned, and I think rightly, that if Iran becomes a nuclear weapon state, it will do even more of the dangerous and provocative and destabilizing things it's been doing in the region and around the world, but they will feel that they are invulnerable if they have a nuclear weapon. And, of course, it will touch off the acquisition of nuclear weapons by other countries who fear an Iranian weapon. And so you will wind up in one of the most unstable regions of the world, the Middle East, with multiple nuclear powers. And that is a very dangerous situation.
Did you say that they were overemphasizing the nuclear issue?
Well, that's one way to put it. The other way is to say we are not putting enough emphasis on the other things the Iranians are
okay, I understand.
That are a danger to us and the world.
Yeah, I understand that. Let us talk about the reaction by Benjamin Netanyahu insofar as I believed, and I talked to several others who were of the same opinion, not that it makes it a correct opinion, that by the president, having these talks and the Secretary of State a few weeks ago saying we could have an agreement in a matter of weeks or months, and I felt to kind of box the Israelis in. Because if an agreement is reached, then how does Israel justify doing anything militarily to Iran? Do you think that this kind of tone from Prime Minister Netanyahu indicates that Israel, and he almost said as much, will not be obliged under any agreement or feel inhibited from defending themselves in any way they deem necessary, including a military strike?
Sure. Well, the Prime Minister of Israel has a responsibility to his own citizens, to the people of Israel, and an agreement that satisfies others but leaves Israel exposed to Iranian nuclear weapons is something that the Israeli Prime Minister alone has to deal with. He can't cede the defense of his country to an agreement of which he's not a party, and that may be adverse to the interests of his country or even its survival. From the Israeli point of view, an Iranian nuclear weapon is an existential threat, and Iranian leaders in the past have threatened to use nuclear weapons against Israel. Nobody knows what the Iranians would do if they actually had a nuclear weapon, but the Israelis certainly can't tie their own hands because somebody else thinks there's a satisfactory agreement.
We're talking to Richard Perle, former chairman of the Defense Policy Board, AEI fellow, American Enterprise Institute, here on the Steve Malzberg Show. We have a couple of minutes remaining, sir. Let me ask you about the Israeli-Palestinian issue. Israel released several dozen prisoners, most of them with blood on their hands, directly convicted of murder or multiple counts of murder of Israeli civilians. They were welcomed as heroes by Mahmoud Abbas recently, and he said at that time that he will not recognize Israel as a Jewish state. It seems very counterproductive to what Israel did as a goodwill gesture and to furthering any peace talks. Not that I ever think they'll come to any peace. But how do you view the situation right now? And what about reports that possibly the administration will interject their own plan and try to force it upon both parties?
Well, the administration may do that. They've threatened to do it in the past. Other administrations have hinted that they might do it. At the end of the day, I don't think they will because the American people very broadly support Israel and would not sit still while an agreement that is dangerous for Israelis was forced upon them. But you asked a moment ago about why why we were taking the position we were taking in these talks. Mm-hmm. And I think the answer is President Obama is not prepared to take any action. One way to avoid to stop the Iranian nuclear program. So one way to avoid taking action is to reach an agreement and claim that it solves the problem, whether it solves it or not. If you define the problem correctly, it is ending the Iranian nuclear weapons program. And an agreement that fails to do that may satisfy the president's requirement for an excuse to do nothing, but it isn't going to solve the problem.
Interesting. Sir, glad you could join us again. I look forward to our next conversation. Thank you very much.
All the best.
Thank you. That's Richard Perle, ladies and gentlemen, former chair of the Defense Policy Board. From 87 to 04, he served on the board, was chair from 01 to 03 under George W. Bush. Very interesting. If you care to weigh in, we'd love to hear from you at 877-Newsmax, 877-639-7629. Coming up at the bottom of the hour.